Hi geographers, and welcome to the first video in the topic of natural hazards and climate change, and today we'll be discussing what is a natural hazard. To start with, I'd like to pause the video and just complete the do now. I'll give you a moment to do that. Right, so the answers for the do now. Question 1, a megacity is a city with over 10 million people. Question 2, in Lagos a social challenge is access to clean water with only 40% of people having clean water. Urbanisation is the increased percentage of people living in towns and cities. In Lagos, 60% of people work in informal jobs. Number 5, high amounts of air pollution due to people in Lagos driving old petrol cars, and the mean is 8. So, today we're looking at what a natural hazard is and different types of natural hazard and what can affect the risk of a hazard. So, a natural hazard is a key word for you to write down, is the threat of an event that could have negative impacts on people. Okay, it's an event that can impact people in a negative way. There are two types of hazards we look at in geography. We've got geological hazards, which are hazards caused by land and tectonic processes like earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis. And then we've got meteorological hazards, which are hazards caused by the weather and the climate, for example, tropical storms, heavy snow, heat wave. Okay, at the bottom you can just see your blue zone task, which is explain how capacity to cope and nature of hazard are factors that increase hazard risk, and we'll go through that a little bit later. So, first things first, what is a natural hazard? Well, a natural hazard is an extreme event that is unusually large or a sudden natural process. Okay, so an earthquake, a tropical storm, a volcanic eruption, these are all events which are large natural processes. A natural hazard is the moment that event could have a negative impact on people. So, for example, an earthquake on a deserted island where no one lives is a natural event. An earthquake happening in a densely populated city like Tokyo is a natural hazard. Okay, so I've put it into a little Venn diagram for you just to sort of break it down. So again, you can see if the no hazard, if the natural event and the people and property do not touch, you have a natural event, an earthquake in the middle of a desert. You've got a natural disaster or hazard when the natural event impacts people and property. So when the earthquake or flood affects people and property, causing injury, destruction of property, destruction of possessions, that is when the event becomes the hazard. So we've got two types of hazard in geography. We look at geological hazard, such as tectonic hazards created by the earth processes on the tectonic structures, and meteorological hazard caused by the atmosphere. Okay. So geological hazards, like I said, they're caused by land and tectonic processes such as volcanoes, earthquakes, landslides, and avalanches. We also look at meteorological hazards, which are caused by weather and climate. For example, tropical storms, extreme weather, heat waves, cold periods. Okay. So what I'd like you to do now is just jot down the numbers 1 to 8, and I'm going to read you 8 sentences. What I want you to do is write down, if the sentence is true, write true. If the sentence is false, write false. And then if it's false, correct the sentence. So copy it out and change the sentence so it is now true. Okay. So a drought is classed as a meteorological hazard. Extreme events are unusually large or sudden natural processes. An example of a natural event is the 2016 earthquake in New Zealand that killed 2 people. Natural hazards become natural events when they actually happen to people. Earthquakes and tropical storms are both examples of meteorological hazards. A natural hazard is the threat of an event that could have negative impacts on people. Geological hazards are caused by land and tectonic processes. And a tsunami is classed as a meteorological hazard. So like I said, go through them, write down true or false, and remember, if it's false, rewrite the sentence so it is now true. If you'd like to pause the video here to do that, that would be great. Right, so let's look at the answers. Got number 1 is true, number 2 is true. Number 3 is false, you would change the word event to hazard. Number 4 is false, you would change the first hazard to event, and that natural events then become hazards when they affect people. Number 5 is false. Earthquakes are geological hazards. Number 6 is true. Number 7 is true. And number 8 is false. A tsunami is a geological hazard. So, we now need to think what factors affect the risk of disasters. Okay, so here's just a quick table showing you 2 earthquakes, one in Japan in 2011 and one in Indonesia in 2004. The Richter scale measures the strength of earthquakes, okay? It goes from 1 up to like 9.9, and the higher you are towards the 9s, the stronger the earthquake. The earthquake in Japan and Indonesia is the same strength, okay? However, in Japan, only 5,894 people died, whereas in Indonesia, 250,000 people died. The economic cost in Japan was $300 billion, whereas in Indonesia, it was less than $10 billion. So we need to sort of rethink why this is the case. How can the same strength of earthquake lead to less people dying in one country compared to the others? And a lot of this comes down to the country's level of development. For example, Japan's a high-income country, whereas Indonesia is a newly emerging economy. This means in Indonesia, buildings will be made out of poorer quality materials, so they're more likely to collapse. This could be in Indonesia, the hospital services aren't funded as well as in Japan. So if a lot of people are injured, they can't all be treated and seen. So what we need to do is just look at figure 5 and just jot down 2 differences between the effects of natural disasters, and then just try to suggest a reason for these differences. Okay. Right, so when we talk about hazard risk, there are 3 key words that I need you to jot down. Okay, hazard risk is the likelihood of being affected by an event, and these include vulnerability. This means the characteristics about a place, e.g. population density. Capacity to cope. This refers to the amount of money a place has. The smaller the capacity to cope, the hazard risk will be higher. And nature of hazard. This means the size of the hazard. So if the earthquake is stronger, there will be a greater risk. If you can just jot down those 3 words and definitions, that would be great. So please pause the video here to do so. Right, so let's just talk through them. So vulnerability, like I said, if an area is densely populated, the hazard risk is going to be higher. Here's a picture of a densely populated city, which is more vulnerable to natural events compared to a rural area. Okay, if there was an earthquake in a large city like this picture, as soon as one building falls down, it's going to fall into other buildings, which means more people will die. Whereas in a rural area where there's lower population density, less buildings will be destroyed, so less people will die. Okay. Capacity to cope refers to the income of a country. HICs have more money, so they can afford to buy better resources. For example, this is the Thames Barrier in London. It costs £500 million. This closes, which means London is less likely to flood. In countries like Bangladesh, where they haven't got enough money to build a flood barrier, when the sea level rises, when the river levels rises, we get a flood, which means we will have more damage. And finally, the last one is nature of hazard. What we can see here is the Saffir-Simpson scale, and this shows us the strength of hurricanes. What we can see is a Category 1 hurricane has winds of 119 to 150 kilometers an hour, whereas Category 5 has winds over 250 kilometers an hour. And what we can see in the pictures is the stronger the wind, the more damage there is. Okay, so what we've got is just this little bit of reading on the Indonesian earthquake of 2004, which led to a tsunami in the Indian Ocean. So what we're going to do is we're going to read through it, and what I want you to do is to just jot down key facts which highlight vulnerability, capacity to cope, or nature of hazard. Okay, so the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami is one of the world's worst natural disasters experienced in the 21st century. A large earthquake of magnitude 9.1 occurred out at sea. That's worth underlining or writing down under the top heading Nature of Hazard. It happened beneath the Indian Ocean, and the large earthquake caused a series of large tsunami waves, some over 100 feet tall. Again, right, 100 feet tall tsunami waves under nature of hazard. And what this means is the waves will travel large distances inland, which means they will destroy more buildings, therefore causing more death. Indonesia was the country that suffered the most from the natural disaster, which killed around 170,000 people in the country. Indonesia is a newly emerging economy, and according to their own measures, 10% of the country live in poverty. I would write down that Indonesia is an NEE, and 10% of people live in poverty under the heading capacity to cope. What this means is where Indonesia is an NEE, this means hospitals may be poorly funded, which means when there is a natural disaster, not everyone can be treated, so more people will die. Also, with 10% of people living in poverty, this means buildings will be poorly built, which means during an earthquake or tsunami, more buildings will collapse, therefore more people will die. And now we're going to be talking about the vulnerability of Indonesia. So the city of Banda Aceh has a very high population density of 4,200 people per kilometre squared and is located close to where the epicenter of the 2004 earthquake was. The relief in the coastal region is flat, which means the tsunami waves travelled a long way inland. And again, vulnerability, you'd write down Indonesia's got a high population density, 4,200 people per kilometre square in the city of Banda Aceh. This means there would be a high number of casualties following the natural disaster, which means hospitals would be under immense pressure, so couldn't treat everybody. Therefore, more people will die. Okay. So feel free to rewind and listen to those explanations again. I'd suggest you've got them written down in chains of reason, because this leads us on to our blue zone. So it says, explain how capacity to cope and nature of hazard are factors that increase hazard risk. Okay, you need to do a KUU on Indonesia's capacity to cope and a KUU on Indonesia's nature of hazard. That means I need a paragraph explaining Indonesia's wealth and how that leads to more people dying and suffering, and a paragraph on Indonesia and the strength of the earthquake and the tsunami and how that leads to more people suffering. Okay, I've got some keywords for you to use in your answer. But before we do that, I just want to talk you through how you would sort of do this as a chain of reason. So you think of your knowledge, 10% of population of Indonesia live in poverty. Well, what does this mean? Think about what this means for quality of buildings. What does that then mean when there is an earthquake? What's going to happen to the buildings? Why is that bad for the people who live inside of them? The second paragraph, the tsunami was 100 feet tall. This means, well, why is that going to be bad if there is a large wave? Is it going to travel a little part inland? Is it going to go a long way inland? And then what does that mean? Why is that going to be bad for Indonesia, for the people who live there? So here's a model answer I wrote earlier. Feel free to read through it. It says capacity to cope refers to how much money a place has. For example, Indonesia is an NEE, knowledge. This means hospitals will be poorly funded, understanding, which means in the event of a natural hazard they'll become overwhelmed, understanding. Therefore, this will increase the amount of death from a hazard, understanding. So we've got a K followed by 3 U's, clearly explaining how Indonesia's wealth affects the hazard. The second paragraph, it says the nature of hazard refers to how strong the event was. For example, Indonesia experienced a tsunami in 2004 with waves over 100 feet. My knowledge. I need to explain it and weigh my understanding. This means the power of the waves will destroy thousands of homes, which means many people will be homeless and at risk of catching diseases. Therefore, more people will die and reduce the number of economically active in Indonesia. Again, you should be able to see there's a knowledge, a fact at the start, followed by a triple chain of reason. This means, which means, therefore. So, here's your blue zone task. Pause the video here. Please complete the task. I'll be quiet while you do that. If you want to pause the video here, that would be great. Perfect. So, once you've finished the task, what I want you to do is if you could mark on your work where you've got your knowledge, your fact, and your understanding in green pen, so K, U, use your, this means, which means is your use. And then try to add an improvement to your comment. So do you need to follow KU structure? Do you need to add more PLC, so specific information about Indonesia? Do you need to use more keywords? You can see the keywords on the board. Have you used all of them? Do you need to add an extra U? Do you need to improve spag? So just jot one of them down in green pen, and that will help you when you go on to your next piece of extended writing in the next lesson. Thank you for listening today. I hope you found this video useful. Feel free to subscribe to keep up to date with the latest videos coming out to support you and your GCSE geography exam. Thank you. Bye.